Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Scalarworks LEAP one-piece scope mount. I'm always looking for lighter, stronger, more reliable, and more ergonomic, and maybe on the bottom list, more aesthetically pleasing, less clunky options for mounting optics. And Scalarworks has been around for a little while, and as you know, if you've paid attention, I'm already a fan of their red dot mounting options. I have them for my aim points, I have them for my MRO, I even have them for RMRs, because I like the design, I like the simplicity, I like the strength, and I like the thoughtfulness that goes into the design for the end user, which ultimately is a shooter. Sometimes you have a problem with engineers not being necessarily shooters through no fault of their own. They got busy jobs, or maybe they don't come from the gun industry and they're designing something for someone who is going to run into problems they didn't foresee because they don't use and shoot. What I like about the guys at Scalarworks is they're willing to listen. Not only are they shooters, but they're also willing to listen to shooters for design input and improving their products or products that they have in the works. When I heard that their one-piece scope mount was coming, I got excited like a kid on Christmas morning, because I was already such a huge fan of their optics mountings. I had to kind of tone it down a little bit because I want to be as objective as possible. I was hoping that it would not be a bad product, but I was really hoping that it would be a great product because I wanted to have good things to say about it. Now, I'd picked up the Razor for an optic review about the same time that the LEAP went on sale, so I grabbed that too so I could put them together and do two reviews at the same time. Now, reviewing an accessory mount, an optic mount, is a little bit more nuanced than reviewing the optic itself, because basically what I'm looking for, besides my personal, somewhat subjective feelings on features and design, I'm also looking for durability. But it's hard to detail durability necessarily for simple products that only serve the purpose of holding an optic in place. Because if I was to say, knock this thing around and then the optic wasn't zeroed, is that the optic or is it the mount? So I kind of prepared myself for a more complicated review process in setting myself up to look at the LEAP. But before we get into that, let's talk about what kind of features you're getting with this mount. It's a one-piece design with a QD attachment that is arguably scope style. Or I should say scout style in design. It's going to sit the optic a little further forward, which lends itself very well to the longer optics, or just really any optic you're going to put on an AR platform, because you've got to be able to push the optic forward, but you also don't want to bridge onto the rail if you can help it, especially if your rail isn't set up for, or doesn't have the known rigidity and strength for bridging. Something you want to avoid if you can, especially on scopes. Another very cool feature, one of the first features you're probably going to interact with, is the proprietary leveling adjustment, self-leveling adjustment. This is a really cool little feature. It's a little screw that's in there, comes from the factory that way, and it allows you to, once you get your scope mounted, you can kind of screw that in there and make sure it's flush with the bottom of your adjustment tower, and at that point you can set your rings, use your Loctite or whatever you're going to use, and then take that little screw out. And then put the scope back on the rifle and go to work. Weight is always an issue. The Scalarworks comes in at a ridiculously low weight, which lends itself very well to some of the heavier, if you have a heavier optic, you want to look for a lighter mount that's still going to maintain the strength rigidity that you're going to want. And the Scalarworks comes in at 5.48 ounces. That's stupid light. That's light as some optic mounts for like aim points and MROs, which arguably have less material in them. And I think that's very attributable to the way they designed it. And then it comes to strength. If it's going to be that light, is it going to be strong? Well, that's the main purpose of the review, is to make sure this thing's going to be long-term durability. But just looking at the design, it's got an I-beam bridge, and it's got very wide rings, wider than some of the comparable or some competitor rings that you see out there. And the ring design is actually pretty unique. It's basically just a class blocking ring design. Everything's one-sided and it's hinged at the top, so that's going to reduce some of the overall stress you're going to put on the optic body, especially if you're new to mounting optics and rings for scopes. But it's definitely going to reduce some of that stress and some of the potential failure points in over-torquing or over-tightening as you mount the optic. LEAP is currently available in a 30mm with 34mm coming. It's only offered in one height right now. I like the height a lot. The 193s and the 203 height optics are very popular right now. You kind of see that bridging over from using RDS under night vision. My thing is, it's not a for everybody kind of thing, it's a preference kind of thing. So some people's ideal optic height, one's going to depend on the optic and the generosity of the eye box, if you will, the ocular relief that you're going to get, or where you have to put your head for your actual cheek weld without introducing scope shadow. But another factor is like just physiology. Like some people are just going to have longer necks than other people. Some people don't have a neck at all. And if it's going to be AR-centric or some other rifle platform, then that's going to factor in as well. So there is no one true height. 193s are great for the people that need 193s. 203s are great for the people who have freakishly long necks and need those 203 height rings. Me personally, I've always wanted to be right around just above 1.5 inches. I like 1.5 to 1.7 is kind of my sweet range if I want to be really, really specific on this is the optimal height for me. But I can get away with a 1.5. I've got an optic that has a 1.44, but it's not a 34 millimeter ring, so the eye box is bigger because the scope just provides a larger viewpoint, so that factors into it as well. So the optic you're putting into it can definitely be a deciding factor. And your 34 millimeter width tubes tend to be larger eye boxes anyway, larger ocular lenses if you want to be specific. So right now it's only offered one height, which may be something that you're not interested in. You're like, oh, that's not tall enough for me. I need this 203 because I have this giraffe neck. Or you just, for some reason, it just works better for you. I mean, that's definitely a factor of physiology, range of motion, body armor concerns, other factors, occupationally related, personally related, that may kind of lend a 203 or a 193 height setup for you. But if you're in the 1.5 to 1.7, 1.8 neighborhood, something a little bit shorter, you tried the 193 and the 203 and you just didn't like it because you had to really crane up there to get to it, this is something as far as height-wise that you might want to consider. Now, before I, of course, give it my stamp of approval, we actually have to review it. First thing I did, just because I was already doing a burn down on the Razor, I also, just because it was on the rifle at the same time, got a burn down on the LEAP. Again, all that is an accelerated rate of fire. But what it can tell us about the mount that we might necessarily not be worried about the actual scope itself is the QD system worth a shit? This is a problem that I've seen on some cheaper optic mounts, not myself personally, but I've had students come through classes. I had like an NC Star mount, I've seen it on a Burris mount, where when they really got that gun rocking, you know, they did 2 or 3 magazines in a short period of time, the optic came loose because the mount was garbage. And the mount was garbage because they didn't put a lot of thought in design, and maybe the person who designed it didn't understand that recoil occurs every time you pull the trigger, and it accumulates in the fact that if it makes a small adjustment every time you pull the trigger, eventually that adjustment's going to reach a point of no return and the optic's going to come loose based on whatever QD design that they had involved, or the tolerances between the screws they used, the bolts they used, the nuts they used, and the metal they were going into, or thread depth, pattern, what have you. So the main purpose of the burn down for the LEAP was to see if it's going to come loose. Happy to report it didn't. I did a zero check before and after I did the burn down just to see if there was going to be any discrepancies. And of course I was fully prepared to have to take the Razor out and put it into another scope mount that I know to be true in the event that something did happen, to make sure it wasn't the optic, it was the mount. But I didn't have that problem because it didn't come loose. I did my hand check, I witness marked it before the shooting began. Everything went great, and that's exactly what I want. Next factor of durability is are the rings going to be able to take a beating, so to speak? Not necessarily abuse, but hard use, depending on what your rifle's for. I needed to make sure that if it took a significant amount of impact, or if there was enough force delivered to the rings themselves, not only would they hold true and maintain the scope and the position that it needed to be in, but nothing on them would break. And that's always a worry I have with new optic mounts, especially the one-piece designs. Depending on how it's designed, is there anything protruding to a degree that it could snag on stuff? Well, with the LEAP, that's just not the case. There's really nothing to snag on because everything is as flush as they could possibly get it without compromising, I think, on purpose. And that's definitely, you know, a factor to consider. Is, you know, you can make your QD mounts or your adjustments or your levers really flush, but are you giving up anything to do that? And what I found with the LEAP, just getting into this, is no, they didn't really give up a whole lot. And I'd already had this experience with their other mounts. They don't really give up anything to gain anything, as far as I can tell, just based on my usage. But had to make sure. So because I was already going to be testing the Razor, and mainly because of the LEAP itself, this thing got multiple drops off that balcony. Now here's my first 5-round group before the drop process began. Now that's 100 meters on a 1 MOA gun. And then, of course, I had to actually drop the optic. Now, this is getting outside the realm of reality. Some people are like, wow, a rifle off a balcony, that's super unrealistic. And you're right, it probably is. It's very probable, because gravity and balconies both exist in the same reality as rifles. So it is potentially possible that a rifle could, through happenstance or circumstance or the events that take place, fall off a balcony. But mainly what I'm trying to do is accelerate drops. You look at a drop, more likely drop is you lean it up against something that falls over. But it could also come in impact with car doors and interior doors and doorways and door frames, other gear, the environment in general. Rifles just slinging around while you're running around and, you know, working barriers and stuff on the range practicing. It's very possible for stuff to get knocked around. So this is kind of an acceleration of that. Now, I did multiple drops because, well, I can. And I wanted to see if I could really accelerate the potential life cycle of the optic mount being bounced around. Now, of course, I understand that if at the end of these drops I found that the zero was off, it might be the optic itself. So again, I was fully prepared to take the optic, re-zero it, check the optic for damage and possible disturbance if, in fact, during the drop test I had that problem. Happy to report that I did not. After those multiple drops, the optic, as you can see here, 5-round group, was able to maintain 0. I checked over the optic itself, make sure there was no damage to it. Of course, it's good to go. LEAP mount held. There's no damage that I could find, no stresses that I could find, no issues that I could find over going over it after those multiple drops. Now, the LEAP might not be everything you want, so it's not for you, and that's where preference factors into everything. But it's something that I'm definitely going to recommend. I already recommend their red dot optic mounts, and now I'm glad that they're offering a scope mount. And they are, I don't want to use the term outside of the box, but they're definitely progressive and aggressive in their design of the LEAP itself. And it's very, not only is it aesthetically appealing, but when you actually get one and you mount a scope faster than you've ever mounted one, mount and level a scope faster than you've ever mounted and leveled one in your life, you can definitely see like the simplicity, but the forward thinking of just because something hasn't been done, why can't it be done? Just that little leveling screw alone, to me, is almost worth it, because it gets a lot of the aggravation, a lot of the tools, a lot of the nonsense out of the scope mounting process. The ring spacement is beautiful. The ring width is beautiful. Everything is very intentional. It's not that they're just like, well, it needs rings, so put rings on it. Now, for some people, the height's going to be an issue. They are going to be offering taller LEAP versions in the future, as well as, like I said, the 34mm option is coming. But for right now, if you're working with a 30mm main tube and you're looking for a mount and you want something that's going to have to be durable, but it's got to be light, you really shouldn't be looking anywhere else. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.